to be discussing how several different types of parasites can cause muscle spasms. They can do this directly and indirectly, so we're going to discuss how they do that. We're also going to discuss what we can do to recover from the muscle spasms, but also the parasites that cause the muscle spasms. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha, and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis over 35 years ago. By the grace of God, I learned early on that MS is an infectious disease. And from that point on, that started my journey on a whole different path where I decided not to follow standard of care. I decided to take a different path, and I decided to search for which types of infections were causing multiple sclerosis. So there's a lot of research that I've done over 35 years. We learned about Candida early on, then we learned about Lyme disease, then we learned about the larger worms, but also the different types of protozoa. So today we're going to be talking about how these or some of these parasites cause muscle spasms, because that is an awful symptom that many of us live with when we are diagnosed with not just MS, but other diseases also. And some of us, we might not even have a disease, but we get these terrible, terrible Charlie horses, and like, what in the world is going on? So sometimes they happen at night quite often. And so we're going to talk about that, because if we can alleviate that symptom and then treat the cause, that is the answer, right? All right, so make sure to type your questions in the question box. If you really like these kind of topics that I share, please like and share and subscribe. Just take a minute to like and share it, because it helps it to get out to the internet where other people are searching for answers for their muscle spasms also. So parasites, and when you look at the literature, they talk about how, well, the parasites don't necessarily cause muscle spasms. Some of them do, but they're associated with muscle spasms. And so that doesn't cause muscle spasms is kind of like a very loose word, because maybe they're talking about directly or indirectly, and those are two totally different things. So for example, they say, well, people that have pinworms or Ascaris roundworms, they could have muscle spasms, and if they do, then that's not being caused by the parasites, but they are associated, people have them with the parasites. So what I can share, like, because we've worked with hundreds of students all over the world, helping them to recover from parasitic infestations, and when the parasites are treated, the muscle spasms stop. So I believe that the biggest cause of the muscle spasms, whether it's directly or indirectly, is the parasites. So let's talk about some of the ways that parasites can directly and indirectly cause muscle spasms. I talked before about lactic acid buildup or lactic acidosis, which is a condition where we have a lot of acids produced by these parasites, and then we become nutritionally deficient in minerals and probably electrolytes. And when we are deficient, because we have parasites that are freeloaders, plus they cause a different type of environment that's not healthy for us, and our body's trying to compensate, so then we can become deficient in things like potassium, magnesium, calcium, and even from our food also. So these parasites can literally indirectly cause these, first of all, electrolyte and mineral imbalances, which can lead to muscle spasms. So that's one way that they can cause muscle spasms. Another one is that a lot of times they will cause anemia. So we could have blood loss. Some of the parasites love hemoglobin. Some of the parasites will infect our red blood cells and cause them to clump together and be sick. So various reasons why we could have anemia, and then in that situation with low blood oxygen, then we definitely could be more prone to muscle spasms and cramping also. So we might start with muscle spasms, and then eventually we end up with spasticity, where we don't get a relief. We don't just get a really bad Charlie horse and then it settles down. It just is like a permanent Charlie horse, and that's very common with multiple sclerosis especially if we've had it for a few years, or other diseases also. When we have systemic inflammation, and we talk about inflammation all the time, we know that all diseases are associated with inflammation. Oh, just one sec, I'm going to just plug something in here for a sec. There we go. We know that all diseases are associated. Inflammation is present in all diseases. Inflammation is your body or your immune's response to some type of enemy. It could be a toxin. Usually it's some type of a microbe. So it's very important to know that inflammation is your body is fighting, your immune system is fighting for you. It's trying to defend you from something. And we know that in every chronic disease, that's the problem, is the inflammation. The immune system is working really hard. So when we have these out of control wars, then we can have systemic or high levels of inflammation, and that is also linked to all kinds of neurological symptoms and weakness. We can have muscle weakness, we can have stiffness, we can have cramping, we can have muscle aches. So, and this is produced by the parasites, by our immune system trying to fight the parasites, but also the toxins that they produce. So this is really, the inflammation is the immune response to the parasite or the toxins they produce, which can cause muscle spasms. And then neurological complications. So I've shared with you that tapeworms and roundworms, and now even flukes, the larvae, the eggs, if we've had parasites for years, they can make their way into different organs and tissue, and again into muscle, and cause all of the problems I mentioned already. But if they get in the central nervous system and they cause inflammation to specific nerves, we can end up with a lot of spasticity there also, and it can cause muscle spasms and spasticity. So it's not just the larva, not just the immature form of the different type of parasite, but it can, and this is not just worms, because we'll talk about malaria, which is a protozoa, it's a protist, and even babesia. So there are many different types, and I didn't even get a chance to look up Borrelia. That's something you might want to look up, but probably it causes muscle cramps also. And then if we do become dehydrated, so I know sometimes that we have a lot of bladder issues and we don't want to drink water because that makes us go to the bathroom more often, and that can lead to stronger and more frequent muscle cramps. I wouldn't say it's the primary cause, but it could make matters worse. And then high fever, but that's not always what we're dealing with when we have multiple sclerosis. Although some of us do get, hot and cold flashes, right? And that's from the parasites also. So what kind of parasites could potentially cause muscle spasms? And this is just a very small amount. There's probably others that can cause muscle spasms, could potentially cause. Some of them are more commonly associated. If we have those parasites, that we may have the muscle spasms more frequently, and we'll talk about those. So trichinosis is one, and that is potentially can cause muscle spasms. So this is caused by a parasitic roundworm, and the larvae, again, migrate to different muscle tissue, causing inflammation and damage. So the larvae, they move into the tissue, and the immune system is like, hey, it shouldn't be here. And so that can cause pain and also spasms. So it can cause muscle pain, stiffness, tenderness, swelling, fever, weakness. And we can get this parasite by eating undercooked or raw meat. So really important that, and so it could be pork, it could be game, but it could be other meat too, but they talked about raw meat as far as pork and wild game. So I guess, I used to like meat, medium rare. I kind of grew up that way. Maybe that was another problem that I had. And of course we can get parasites from other ways also, but it's probably a good idea to cook your meat and fish, and I would not eat sushi anymore. I never really ate sushi because I did a science degree and we dissected all kinds of worms and things. And so when you see them, and that was before I even knew how many we had inside of us, I'm like, nah, I don't want to, I'll just pass on the raw sushi. But that is another great source of parasites, parasitic worms. And I know they say, well, if you freeze it long enough, but apparently people are still getting infected with parasitic worms from eating raw fish. So symptoms of this, let's go into toxoplasmosis now. So toxoplasmosis is a type of protozoa. It's a single cell parasite, and it's really known for causing a lot of symptoms, but also specifically spasticity and tremors. So it can cause a lot of inflammation in the central nervous system and in the muscle, like a lot of inflammation in muscle and central nervous system involvement. So again, a lot of these parasites, people can be relatively asymptomatic for a while until the parasite reproduces and reproduces. And so we may have had them for a while, maybe even a few years, where we were managing. We might have had some annoying symptoms, but then all of a sudden, maybe we go through high stress or something, and then all of a sudden the immune system is not dealing with them as well. So some people could be asymptomatic if the parasite load isn't too much, and severe infections can lead to muscle and neurological symptoms. Again, the spasticity and tremors, and that is toxoplasmosis. We can get that from eating contaminated food, water, but also from our kitties. You have to be really careful with cats in the house, especially the litter box, their feces. It's really passed through that. So if you've had cats in the house for years before you came down with a neurological disease, it is possible that they have infected you with certain parasites. And then we have cysticercosis and cysticercosis or neurocysticercosis, and that would be tapeworm larva. So it's bad enough when we have a tapeworm in our intestines, but if we live with that tapeworm for a while, then the immature form, the young ones, they travel into the blood, they move into our tissue, and again can cause, like our muscles, can cause cysts, can cause the pain, the swelling, the inflammation, right, and spasms, but especially when they get into the central nervous system. So when they're in the nervous system, also seizures and muscle spasms and many other neurological symptoms can occur. They're really quite typical in multiple sclerosis, according to the findings of Dr. Alan MacDonald, who is a pathologist in the United States. He found tapeworm larvae in the central nervous system of every MS subject that he studied. So he found juvenile tapeworms growing in a couple, like 2 out of 10, but out of 10, he found the immature larva in the central nervous system. So that's neurocysticercosis in the central nervous system of people that had multiple sclerosis, a confirmed diagnosis. They died. Their remains were left in brain banks for study, and he studied them, and he found filarial worms. We'll talk about those in a minute. And he found tapeworm larvae and developing tapeworms in the central nervous system. So these larvae of the tapeworm can cause muscle spasms if they make their way into our muscle, if they make their way into the central nervous system. And then there is schistosomiasis, so that is the blood fluke. We talked about the intestinal fluke, and I can just tell you from my students is that when they're passing these very large intestinal flukes, that before they had muscle spasms, and then as they treat, those muscle spasms go away also. So although I haven't seen a lot of direct evidence of the intestinal flukes causing muscle spasms, I can tell you anecdotally from our students that are recovering that, muscle spasms, especially in the legs, we can have them in other muscles too, but mostly I would say in the legs is super common with multiple sclerosis. And not all of our students show that they're passing flukes, but quite a few do. It's a lot more common than we realize, as I shared on our last live event last week. So really important to know, like schistosomiasis is just the blood fluke. So that's one. And yes, that has been shown in science that it can be linked with muscle spasms. So schistosomiasis is a type of fluke. It's a blood fluke. Chronic infections can lead to systemic inflammation. So that's a really common theme, is that they cause systemic inflammation. They produce poisons that our immune system is fighting too. And they also cause nutritional deficiency. So we might have a lot of inflammation in our gut. We're not absorbing our nutrition. We're not digesting our nutrition. We can have imbalances due to the lack of absorption and digestion, but we can also have lack of nutrients like electrolytes and minerals due to the parasites freeloading and eating up our nutrients, which is what they do. But also the fact, even just one little thing, is that, remember I mentioned the high levels of organic acids that they produce, and then our body is trying to buffer that because our body cannot survive in a really highly acidic environment. So then we become deficient. So, and there's probably many other ways that they can cause electrolyte and mineral imbalances. So sometimes it's that's causing the muscle spasm, is that maybe there's like we have a deficiency or an imbalance in potassium or calcium. We'll talk about how we can mitigate this symptom while we're treating the cause in a moment. So looking at schistosomiasis, again, a lot of it is contaminated food, right? And I talked about intestinal flukes and how they say, oh, well, you know, like humans are releasing their feces into water. I don't know about you, but I sure don't. We use toilets, but anyhow, so like maybe it's going into the septic field, but we're not drinking that water. Anyhow, so maybe it's the treatment plants that are not taking care of treating the water like it should. But then they say, oh, then the eggs have to be in water and they have to, you know, hatch in certain water, like snails, and then from there, then fish are going to eat them, and then we eat contaminated fish, or maybe we drink the contaminated water, but we have to only get the larva, or maybe the pigs are eating the larva in the plants, the water plants. We live in Alberta. We don't have a lot of water plants. And then we're getting, if we don't cook our pork well enough, then we can get the intestinal fluke from the pork. But then they say, like, if you just do one drug, we talked about last week, praziquantel, if you do that for, you know, I think it's 3 consecutive days, that you're fine and it's all done. And it's like, no, that's not what we're seeing in our students. Like, they're treating for like 14 days, multiple drugs together, they're passing these flukes, and then they're doing multiple cycles and they still have them. So possibly a part of its life cycle could be, maybe that's how flukes move on to different hosts, right? Maybe that's one way that they move on to different hosts, but I'll bet that they can totally reproduce inside of us also. And I haven't seen the evidence showing that that is not true, because they're not easy to treat. If they totally like just lived for a couple of years and you treat them all the adults are gone, eggs don't hatch in you, it would be a self-limiting infection, right? And you'd be done with it. It'd be so simple. And that's not what we're seeing, is that it takes a lot of strategy to get them out of the system. So and that was talking about intestinal flukes. So I'm going to go back to talking about schistosomiasis. So the last thing, the transmission again is through contaminated fresh water. Makes me think of all the days that I was swimming in we have beautiful lakes here, right? And if you're younger, or maybe you're like doing some water sports and you drink some of the water, like you have no idea what you're drinking. And then in some of the beaches, we have all these geese, and they're cute, but they poop everywhere, right? And they are notorious for swimmer's itch, which is schistosomiasis. And I'm like, we have blood flukes in Canada? I thought it was all in Asia. So like, there's so much that we don't know, that we just take for granted. You just hear, oh, swimmer's itch, oh, that must be a bacteria. And then you find out, no, it's a fluke. And if your immune system, like they get into your skin and they produce a big welt, and if your immune system doesn't clear all of them, then they start to make their way into your small intestine, and they start to grow. And sure, maybe if you have just a few, you're not going to notice a lot of symptoms. But with our students, they have hundreds of worms in them. We're documenting it, and they're still alive. They're suffering terribly. They have neurological diseases, but it's not like we have 1 or 2 worms and we're really sick. It's shocking how we can be alive when we are that infested. Let's talk about malaria. So I shared a 5 or 6 part series of events. You can find them on our blog post. If you just do livediseasefree.com and malaria or babesia, you'll see all of those different, all the research I showed. So it's really looking like MS is very often a cardiovascular disorder. So not an autoimmune disorder, not where your immune system is attacking your nerves for no reason, but they're saying that there's something going on with the cardiovascular system, and something is wrong. And there is such a huge link between this one particular parasite. It's not the only one we're dealing with, but it could be causing a lot of the MS specific or, the neurological other diseases too that have a lot of neurological symptoms. And so malaria is caused by a protozoa. It's a single cell. It's a more complex structure than a bacteria. And malaria targets muscles, leading to muscle aches, muscle contractions, muscle fatigue, muscle pain, muscle weakness, and it can cause muscle spasms indirectly through fever, dehydration, systemic inflammation. So you're kind of seeing a pattern of how these worms cause systemic inflammation. And again, they can always change, they can create imbalances too, right? So symptoms: muscle stiffness, pain, spasms, especially during acute attacks. And we get malaria through mosquitoes, through biting mosquitoes. And we might think that we don't have malaria, but we do still have malaria in the developed countries, like in the United States and Canada, I'm sure in Europe, but we're not looking for it. The doctors are not looking for it at all. And some people can have acute cases and some people can have chronic cases where it's hard to detect, especially if you've had it for a long time. The malaria will often move into the central nervous system and they're not going to pick it up in the blood. So I looked up too, because babesia and malaria are very similar protozoa that infect our red blood cells, and babesia could be linked with MS a lot too. And again, I didn't see a lot of evidence that babesia is linked with muscle spasms, but again, it causes systemic inflammation and it does cause clumping of the red blood cells. It causes anemia. It can cause, I'm sure, the electrolyte imbalances. So indirectly, all these parasites can cause muscle spasms for sure, and some more directly. So malaria was quite obvious that it was involved with muscle spasms, and schistosomiasis and toxoplasmosis. Those three were kind of like standing out a lot more. And then there is filariasis, which are small filarial worms that are present in the central nervous system of MS patients, as what was discovered by Dr. Alan McDonald, amazing pathologist. I would just vote for him to win a huge award for the work that he's done. I just wish that other researchers would try to disprove him, would follow up on his research and do some more studies to look for these filarial worms in MS subjects that have passed, that are used for research purposes. So these are very small nematode worms that we can get them through not just ticks, but we can get them through mosquitoes. And the immature larvae, they move in, different species will live in different parts of the body, some like the central nervous system, some like the lymphatic system, etc. So immature larvae, larvae mature in one species will mature in the lymphatic system. So that is it's not the blood system, but it's kind of like the liquid where our immune cells and our immune system uses. And that can cause a lot of inflammation again and obstruction. So again, the immune system is not happy with them. Symptoms can involve fever, swollen lymph nodes, elephantitis. So this is just one type of filarial infection. And then swelling, muscle stiffness, spasms, especially with the swelling. But we know that another species, and I think it's digitatus Parasites digitalis, that one can get in the central nervous system and can cause muscle spasms, and that one is more linked with multiple sclerosis and neurological diseases. So we can even get them from domestic animals also, or domestic animals will have them also. And so mosquitoes and ticks can carry these filarial, the immature larvae. Hookworms, yay. Oh, so disgusting. I'm like, dear Lord, why do I have this job? Like, I know that it is so important, and that's why I'm doing this, and it is so necessary, but it kind of gets at, I'm looking and researching worms all the time, but okay, that's the way it is. So hookworm is, again, another parasitic nematode. The larva can penetrate the skin. So if you're walking barefoot on infected ground, it can actually burrow through your heel, migrate into the bloodstream, go into the lungs, and then it matures in the intestines. Symptoms, we can have abdominal pain, diarrhea, fatigue, iron deficiency, so the anemia, itchy skin where they enter can cause nutritional deficiencies, and we can have blood loss. And so this can also all contribute to muscle spasms and many other symptoms too. So they're really transmitted through skin contact with the larva in contaminated soil. So that's why I think it's a really good idea. Like if you have a pet in town, like a dog or cats or anything that's putting their feces in your yard, I would definitely be having an area that's segmented off for their waste material and their feces, and I would be cleaning that up all the time. I would not let them go through the whole yard with their stool, dropping it, and then having the kids play in that and walking on that grass. It's not a good idea. And then there is strongyloidiasis, and this would be another parasitic roundworm. So there's probably a lot more, but these are just a few of the different types of parasites that directly or indirectly can cause muscle spasms. So this parasitic roundworm, the larva, again, a lot of times it's not the worms, it's the larvae that are causing the problem. But they migrate to the skin, they go into the bloodstream to the lungs, and then they're swallowed to mature in the intestines. How lovely is that? Itchy skin, abdominal pain, diarrhea, sepsis, and again, they can cause muscle spasms indirectly. So although they don't, in a lot of literature, they don't say that a lot of these parasites, like directly, it's like they're going up to your muscle and they're inflaming the nerve there and causing muscle spasms. They're not talking about that, but they're talking about the immune reaction to it, like the immune system, the war that's going on in your body, the deficiencies that are present because of these parasites, and then sometimes like directly, right? And it can be even the toxins that they're producing. And I think that the biggest problem is that there's so little research on this. It's ridiculous because there's no money in treating parasites, so they're not going to spend a lot of money researching parasites. They don't want to treat parasites because if they treated a parasitic infestation, they are not going to need all of the expensive immunomodulatory, they call it immunomodulatory. It's actually immunosuppressive drugs. They're dangerous. We need our immune system. We need our immune system. And so these immunosuppressive drugs are dangerous, but they're very, very lucrative. So they don't want to treat parasites. They don't want to figure out which parasites we have. They don't want to understand the life cycle. They don't want to find the best treatments for them. They're actually repurposing parasite drugs to treat cancer. So what they're going to do is they're going to take the parasite drugs, they're going to give it a new name, they're going to give it a new purpose, jack up the price to kind of where we have these MS immune module, like $100,000 to $150,000. You know, that's kind of a sweet spot. And then they have some more good products, lucrative products to sell. But we have a multi-trillion-dollar healthcare industry where people are suffering terribly. They are not living their life. They are dying prematurely. They're not raising their children. They're not playing with their children or their grandchildren. There's young people that are in care homes that are in their 20s because of parasitic infestations. like, yes, the people in care homes, they are infested with parasites. And yes, if they knew about it, they could have probably mitigated them and controlled them better and stayed out of the care homes for maybe 5, 10 more years, 15 more years. Who knows? If we would recognize parasites and if we would treat parasites. This is the problem. Right now, our healthcare system is hijacked. And thank goodness, well, I hope that with the new administration in the United States and with the new people in charge that are going to be, working in the healthcare part, I hope that, like, from all indication, I don't want to say any names or whatever, but it looks like he's really, really open to all of this. And he's open to treating the cause. And he's open to, helping people to get healthy and not living with these stupid parasites and not living with toxic food and everything else that's going on around us. It's so sad to see our children, like our grandchildren, like my grandchildren and grandchildren that I know, like most of them have some kind of a health condition. It could be that they can't eat all foods, right? They're sensitive to certain foods. It could be that they have eczema. It could be that they have asthma. It could be that they have a chronic cough. And then they could have other things like cancer and more serious things. So it's a state of our food. It's a state of the environmental toxins we're dealing about, which we're not talking about today. But the biggest factor is what's living inside of us, right? And the muscle spasms are brutal. They're absolutely brutal, especially when we end up with spasticity. So let's talk about management of muscle spasms. So the very first thing that people have found the greatest symptom improvement is really decreasing the carbohydrates. All parasites love carbohydrates and simple sugars. That is their favorite food. When you binge this Christmas, if you binge over the holidays on sweets, you are feeding the parasites and you are going to make the spasms worse. You're going to make the spasticity worse. So what you first need to do is you first need to decrease the carbs to the food to the parasites that are causing, directly and indirectly, causing the muscle spasms. We've had some people that go low carb and they have no more muscle spasms. It can be that dramatic. And wouldn't that be nice? So that means going onto our website, livediseasefree.com, looking up the Live Disease Free Diet Guidelines. We sent out and make sure that you get our newsletter this week, which is all the holiday meal ideas, snacks, drinks, appies, all of these things that taste really good, but they're safe. And they're not going to feed the infections. Of course, using moderation with a few of them, but most of them, they're totally fine. So what you can do is you can go through the holidays and test me. Like, tell me, like, follow that. Just get all those good food in the house, like the low-carb food. Follow the instructions. And then in the new year, let me know how you did on the next live event in 2025. You'll be shocked. It can really decrease not just your spasms, many other things too. You'll find your bladder is so much happier with you because the parasites are affecting urgency in bladder also. So there's many symptoms that can improve strength, cognitive function, energy, spasms, and that we're talking about the spasms today. So diet, get the carbs low. It's shocking. So like even malaria loves carbohydrates, is involved in low blood sugar. So as you follow the guidelines, make sure you're eating regularly, that you're giving yourself enough nutrition, that you're not starving yourself, but you're just decreasing the carbs and bring in lots of healthy fats, bring in moderate protein, bring in the vegetables that agree with you. They can be raw, they can be cooked. And if you don't have a gallbladder, of course, talk to your doctor, but some of our students will use ox bile and they'll use digestive enzymes like lipase, and they're fine with the fat. And it's just shocking, like the difference. So that's number one, is the diet. Number two is we have to, we want to manage the symptoms before we treat the parasites, right? So as we're decreasing our carbs, what kind of things can we do? We can take electrolyte and mineral supplements. So making sure that we could get a blood test done too to see where our calcium and our potassium and our magnesium. A lot of my students are taking magnesium because they're constipated. So they usually they're not deficient in magnesium, but it could be potassium, it could be calcium. So making sure you're just taking a little bit of a supplement of those. Citrate would be fine. Calcium from algae, like algae cal. And then also the minerals. So we want to offset the acidosis that we're dealing with when we have a lot of parasites. And so by bringing in more minerals, we're going to feel more calm. We feel just better, like, because everything's going to work better. So minerals and electrolytes, support that. If you go onto amazon.com.ca, you'll see that there are some leg cramp creams where you can actually apply the cream right onto wherever you're having the cramps. And that has been helpful for some students. I would first diet, and that is something you can change, and then electrolytes and minerals, and then if necessary, use the leg cramp cream. So there's Highland leg cramp cream, and there's TheraWorks, TheroWorx, something like that. And so you can find those and you can use those. So that's just to mitigate the symptom or to help decrease it while you are getting ready to treat. And again, if you want to know all the steps we take before we start treating these parasites, make sure to watch my masterclass training. You'll see a link, and it's free, and it shares all the steps we take to recover from these parasites that cause muscle spasms and many other symptoms. Now, the golden nugget that I want to share with you, this is absolutely crazy. I was so shocked when I saw this. So quinine is a drug that is used to treat malaria, and we're not using it much anymore, but it was historically used to treat malaria. Okay, so it is a anti-malaria drug. And quinine has been used to treat leg cramps, particularly nocturnal or leg cramps we have at night, which is really interesting. So a very common symptom of malaria is leg cramps. And then here you have a malaria drug, quinine, that when they give it to people in smaller amounts, so it's not being used to treat malaria, they're just giving smaller amounts, not a therapeutic dose to treat malaria, but a smaller, lower dose to manage leg cramps. So this is what they used to do. In Canada, they used to use quinine. Our doctors used to use quinine to treat leg cramps. Isn't that interesting? And malaria is a very common symptom is leg cramps. And I shared that 5 or 6 part series about, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where we were having outbreaks of malaria. In particular, they were talking about the United States, possibly Canada too, but they were talking about the US, how there were these malaria outbreaks, and they were giving, everybody quinine, and the MS patients did so incredibly well on quinine. Like, some of them became basically symptom-free on quinine. Isn't that interesting? And then so make sure to go back and look at that. That's really profound research, because that all connects with the MS being a cardiovascular disorder, because something's affecting, and then we see the blood work, our red blood cells are off, and of course we know that malaria and babesia, they are protozoa that infect our red blood cells, so that would help us to understand why we would have sick red blood cells and we would have a cardiovascular disorder. So it's all connecting. Thanks be to God for answering my prayers and bringing all this information out. I give him all the credit. I'm just, trying to follow his lead, and it's just amazing. And I'm just so grateful. So so they're saying that quinine is thought to relieve muscle cramps by reducing excitability of motor neurons, which helps to prevent or reduce. They don't know. they don't know why it is reducing muscle cramps, but we know because it's a malaria drug. And so they're just giving like a lower dose of quinine, or they did, but they're not doing it anymore because there are adverse effects. And it's like, well, how come it's okay to have adverse effects from some drugs and from other drugs it's not okay? Like even aspirin, right? There's so many drugs that there's some, adverse effects, chances of risk of not having a good outcome. So I looked, I wanted to say like how dangerous is it, right? But anyhow, let me look at the effectiveness. So some studies have shown that quinine can modestly reduce the frequency and severity of leg cramps, but the effect is not consistently significant across all populations. So this is kind of like an overview. Its effectiveness in preventing leg cramps may be limited compared to the risks associated with its use. So let's look at the risks, right? So there could be, like very often when you're treating parasites, you can have symptoms like that get stronger, and that is because of the die-off of the parasites. So we know, actually back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they knew that when they treated malaria, the patients would be really prone to strong Herxheimer reactions, right? So then you could have symptoms like dizziness and visual disturbances and headache and nausea, etc. Hypersensitive reactions. So I'm not saying that any of these are good, but I'm just saying that it can happen when you're treating parasites, especially certain ones that cause strong immune reactions. And so I think the biggest one that they were really concerned about was the thrombocytopenia, which is low platelet count, hemolytic anemia, and they talk about cardiac toxicity, gastrointestinal disorders, skin rashes, neurological. So it sounds really bad, doesn't it? It sounds really awful. So I went to the Cochrane Library, and Cochrane Library is really great because what they do is they scour all the studies and they do usually a meta-analysis. They'll look at a whole bunch of studies and try to make sense, if things are helpful or not, or if things are safe or not. So they looked at a significant number of studies. I just pulled this up really quickly here. I think it was like 23 studies. Hopefully I pulled that up. I don't know. Just one second here. Maybe I can find it here. I have a feeling that I got rid of a few of the, yes, I did. I closed. I think it was over 20 studies that they were looking at. It will be in my notes. So you will find all of this research where you can look at the studies on your own on our blog post. So we have an article that I write, and I'll put the shortened video there too. And please share that with different practitioners. It's really exciting that people from all over the world are reaching out, like the Netherlands and Australia, New Zealand, someone from Mexico today, healthcare professionals. So it's really exciting to see that this is getting out, but it can't get out unless you share it. All right. So the Cochrane Library, they did a study and they compared placebo, so that means that people that did not get quinine, to a group of people that did have quinine, and they were looking to see if it made any difference. All these studies were looking to see if quinine really helped decrease muscle spasms. And so quinine, they found significantly reduced cramp number over 2 weeks by 28%. And cramp intensity by 10%, and cramp days by 20%. Remember that they're just using a suboptimal dose. So this is not a dose that's going to kill malaria. It's just going to slow it down, make it suffer a bit. And they noticed that the cramp, again, significantly reduced the number of cramps over 2 weeks by almost 30%, and the intensity by another 10%, and the number of cramp days by 20%. So the cramp duration was not significantly affected. And then they said that as a significantly greater number of people suffered minor adverse events on quinine versus the sugar pill. Okay, remember it is a significant greater number of people suffered minor, not big, minor adverse. So we know that if it is malaria, they are going to have Herx reactions for sure. So they said mainly gastrointestinal symptoms, And overdoses of quinine has been reported. So this is not the study, but they're just saying that if you ever took too much quinine, it's been reported that it could be, you could have potentially fatal adverse effects. But overdosing on a lot of the drugs, you could have potentially fatal adverse effects. But in these trials that they looked at, there were no significant difference in major adverse effects when they compared the study group that got quinine and the other group that got placebo, the sugar pill. So again, they found no significant difference in major, remember all that scary things that I listed? They found in all these studies, they found no significant difference in major adverse events when you compare the people that got quinine to the people that got the sugar pill. There was only one person that did get thrombocytopenia, which is not good, but that was literally a risk of 0.12%. So that is that's like just over 0.1%. So not even 1%, but like 0.1%, which is very, very low. So I found that really interesting. So they were giving them dosages of about 200 to 500 milligrams per day. And then I thought, well, what is the adult dosage for if you're going to treat somebody with quinine for malaria? And typically what I found is 648 milligrams orally every 8 hours for 7 days. So 3 times 8, so 3 times a day you're getting 648 milligrams for 7 days. Whereas in these studies where we're using quinine to treat muscle cramps, they're giving them anywhere between 200 to 500 milligrams per day. So it's way, way, way less. So isn't that interesting? That's another piece of evidence that potentially multiple sclerosis, like one of the main infections that cause multiple sclerosis, maybe is malaria. Who knows? Or babesia, right? Both of them are treated the same. Both of them will infect our red blood cells. So they're very, very similar in the symptoms they cause, the damage they do in the body, how we treat them. But we are ignoring all of this. So frustrating. I'm going to go to your questions. Okay, let's see here. Oh, where is it? One sec. Okay, there we go. All right. I'll take just a couple minutes for your questions. Hi, Chris from Australia. Hello, life coach, medical model. David, you're very welcome. Hi, Angela. Hi, Galen. Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for all that you do. Where can I find a list of the services you provide that can minimize or eliminate my suffering? So, Karen, what you should do is watch my masterclass training, because I explain all the steps that we do in the Live Disease-Free plan. And so watch that first. And then if you're like, man, this is exactly what I'm looking for, but I don't have support from my doctor, then make sure, if you think that you might want to work with me, then you can fill out a form and you and I will chat. You're going to get an email and it's called pre-work. So we want you to listen to the coach-a-thon first, because that explains a lot of questions you might have, like, how do I get access to these treatments? What treatments am I going to need? How do I find doctors? How do I do this, that? Maybe I'm in Europe, maybe I'm far away, like, is that going to work? So all of that is explained on the coach-a-thon. You're more than welcome to join, but whether you join before I chat with you or if you want to book a time in my calendar to chat with me, either way, I will be chatting with you if you'd like to work with me, or even if you potentially think this might be a good fit for you. So we'll be on the phone. You can ask very specific questions to make sure it's a good fit for you, where you live, and just get all your concerns answered. And then you can start. We've had a lot of students join just like in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I'm so excited. Like, they're so smart to actually get on the bandwagon and start to feel better before Christmas, and not to just go through the holidays and eat and drink and come back in January like, I feel like I'm dying. The parasites can make you feel like you're dying, right? And so don't feed them. at least look at my Live Disease-Free diet on our website, livediseasefree.com, under research in the main menu. Follow those guidelines and make sure you're part of our email list so you'll get our newsletter this week with all of the different meal ideas, appies, drinks, etc. So that go to livediseasefree.com. You can, if you want to watch the masterclass training, you can just put your name and email in, watch it. You'll be getting our newsletter. You'll know when I go live. And then if you feel that this is something that you want to do, you want to join the other wellness champions, then make sure to join. And I would be super honored to support you. So since the parasitic infections is common, then why is nobody requiring parasitic infection as a portion of their medical standard of care? Well, who's running our healthcare system? So for just multiple sclerosis, look on the last 2 pages of the 2017 McDonald criteria. So the panel of experts that decide how we diagnose and treat MS, they are heavily funded by the people that sell the MS drugs. And those are all immunosuppressive drugs. They don't want to treat parasites. There's no money in treating parasites. They might cure a person with maybe, let's say, $5,000 or $10,000, if somebody needs like multiple treatment cycles and multiple drugs. But with these MS drugs, they're over $100,000 a year for the rest of your life, as long as your body will handle it. So there's no comparison in, like, these are companies, but the problem is they have too much influence in our healthcare system. So we do need pharmaceuticals for certain things, but we have, like, somewhere around the 1950s, 60s, there was a shift. Before that, doctors thought that infections, parasites cause disease. And then all of a sudden, I think the Rockefeller Foundation had a little bit to do with it. They started teaching doctors it's all autoimmune, all disease, over 80 autoimmune diseases. Like, no, we don't know what causes it. There is no cure. People just have to take these immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their life. And it would be fine if we would have quality of life and we could afford it. But number one, we can't afford it. So they're covered by plans, but they don't give us quality of life. We still become disabled. So it's a crime. I believe it's a crime. It's really awful. I'm not blaming our doctors. They don't know. They haven't learned this in med school. Even our integrative practitioners are not being taught about parasites other than Candida and Borrelia, which causes Lyme disease. So maybe Lyme disease. But I mean, they're just using herbs, and people are not recovering with just that alone. Louise, you wonder what parasite causes the MS chest hugs. Well, all I know is that our students recover from that hug, the MS hug, when they treat the parasite. So we just kind of look at, through energy testing, what parasite drugs we test well for. We have other criteria also. And with all that criteria, we build a game plan, and that is what people treat. But you'd be surprised how much symptom improvement you can have with just diet alone. You still have to treat the parasites for sure. So Matt, you heard that well water has many parasites. Well, it's very, very possible. You should never drink well water. You should always drink filtered water, and not just drinking well water. You should, don't wash your vegetables in it, because you can be putting parasites, like even just minimum amounts of water from the well. You should treat the water that you are washing your vegetables with, that you are drinking, absolutely. Louise, could worm-infected manure cause problems? Absolutely. So yes. So you can have fertilizers that you put in your garden, and they can come from countries, especially organic, and they could potentially have parasites, especially if we're using the steer manure or horse manure, and just know that parasites are part of life. So like if you have any animals that are putting their feces, it can be birds, it can be cats, it can be dogs. Some of us have a lot of animals, so you have to use, I wear gloves all the time, and I wash my hands like crazy when I come in, and my dogs are outside. I don't have any animals in the house anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. So Sherry, 2 of my doctors have told me that they will not give me a prescription for ivermectin. One of them went so far as to consult a neurologist who also said no. So then you have to decide, like, are you going to just go with what those two people said with very limited knowledge, or are you going to just carry on? Because you will find people like that's what we help you to do in the program, that you will be able to treat. All right. You were diagnosed with MS, Jacqueline, at the age of 19. I'm so sorry to hear that. You had pinworms. I think that's what you were saying. Had pinloans. I think you mean worms. When I was probably 10 years old. So I don't think that pinworms cause MS, but definitely, like, what we see is that people could have pinworms. But yes, that's a sign that you definitely had parasites. So another person had pinworms, terrible problem with breathing, and did recall anal itching. Result, she thought she had lung cancer. That's awful. Pam, do you recommend that all those with an MS diagnosis should consider having a stool test done to detect the presence of parasites? I would say save your money. At this time, we don't have good stool tests. If you don't have to pay for it, go ahead and have it done. But the very best parasite tests, they will pick up about 10% of the parasites. If you're lucky, 10% of the parasites that you have. So it's not worth the $700 to $1,000 or $1,500 for these tests. It's not worth it at this time. So I'm not going to talk about all the steps because we've gone an hour, but basically we use energy testing. So instead of trying to figure out which parasites we have, instead we are looking to see which parasite drugs test well for us. So we're going at it kind of backwards. So Jacqueline, you were diagnosed with MS at 8/19. You had okay, I got that one. Okay, last couple of questions here. Yes, JFK, I really hope that he follows through. I know he's been a really huge health advocate for many years. Have a lot of respect for him, so I'm really excited. How do I get treatment? Mary's asking. So you need to work with somebody, either a practitioner or you can work with us, and we can help you to find practitioners and get the treatments. But I would say, please don't try to treat yourself. There are so many desperate people that, like, there was one lady that I talked to in the Netherlands, and she is a nurse, she can't, but she was doing like long distance with some person, and they gave her way too much ivermectin, and she wasn't ready to treat. And now she's literally burning up in pain in bed. Like, don't mess around with parasite drugs. Either you're going to take too much and you can hurt yourself if you don't take enough. We have never found one parasite drug cures MS. We don't. Usually students test well for 3 to 5. You have to be ready to treat. So like, there are really well-meaning practitioners that don't have experience, and they could be like just putting people on, like another one, and I have a lot of respect for this doctor, but he's putting her on all these parasite drugs, and he's like, yeah, just have a smoothie and have, a muffin, and she's literally dying, and she's done several treatment cycles. And so you have to work with somebody who has experience. You first have to make yourself stronger, feeling better, less symptoms, less inflammation. Your bowel movements, your detox pathways are open. Support physiology, which might take you just 3 weeks, and then, or 2 weeks, it's up to you. And then you can start figuring out a game plan. And that's what we help people to do. We've been doing this for years. We just learned about the parasite drug probably about 5 to 7 years ago. So we've had lots of students use them. We really understand how safe they are if used properly. But again, it's like, what is your goal? Is your goal just to kind of mess around, or is your goal to just make 2025 the best year you've had in many, many years, right? So this is something, think about this now, not January 1st, not when you've binged on sugar and alcohol and lack of sleep and you feel like you're closer to death. Like, don't do that. It's not worth it. And I had a really encouraging, and I should have shared the successes, but I have one young man and his mom is supporting him, and she's like, just profusely thanking us. Like, he hasn't even started the parasite drugs. And she's like, I'm getting my son back. He's just he's back to life. He's back to energy. And this is what's possible for you if you take the right steps. So what I encourage you to do is to make sure, first of all, if you want to help us to get the word out, please like this video and share it. Share it with different groups. Share it with different practitioners. And then you can subscribe if you want to know when I'm going live the next time, but also watch my masterclass training. And if you feel that this is the direction you need to go, then make sure to book a time to chat with me, and I would be honored to support you. And don't wait until you have another attack of whatever disease you're dealing with and then you have more disability. It's not worth it. Protect your mobility. The sooner you treat the parasites, the more recovery you will have and the quicker you can recover. So for that, just make sure to look out for the meal planning tool, like not the meal planning toolkit, but the Christmas meal ideas, the holiday meal ideas that we have, so that you can be ready for Christmas with lots of good food and not sacrifice your health. And then make sure to start with the diet. But if you're ready, then watch the masterclass and book a time with me. And we will be taking off some time. I won't be here live for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to take some well-deserved time off with my family. We'll be traveling to see other family, and I'm really excited. We've got some really exciting things coming in the new year. So with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday. I'll be talking to you in 2025, unless you book a time to chat with me a little earlier. So take care and bye-bye for now.